Welcome to your own channel, Whispers in Deadlight. New chilling, horror, creepy encounters, ghost stories videos are waiting for you. Please subscribe this channel, so you never miss a moment of the darkness. Now let's begin with story number 1. Emal always enjoyed his visits to Sarah's house. It wasn't just the peace and quiet, but the sense of being away from the buzz of the city. Sarah's house was on the edge of town, surrounded by trees and fields that stretched out for miles. It was the perfect place for him to get some research done without distractions. It was a Friday in July, and the weather was a bit unpredictable. Sarah had mentioned that a storm was expected later in the evening, but Emal wasn't too worried. He'd lived through many storms before. He figured it would be just like any other: rain, wind, maybe a bit of thunder. Nothing to be concerned about. Sarah's parents were away on a business trip, leaving her home alone. Emal didn't mind. He enjoyed her company, and besides, it meant he had the whole house to himself. Her house was big, with a large living room, a cozy kitchen, and her bedroom with a big window that offered a clear view of the surrounding woods. But today, something felt off. It was the kind of feeling that gnawed at the back of your mind, a subtle unease you couldn't shake. Sarah didn't seem to notice it, though. She had a lot on her plate, taking care of things around the house while Emal tried to focus on his writing. "You're staying with me tonight, right?" Sarah asked as she walked into the kitchen, giving Emal a quick smile. "Of course," Emal replied, distracted. "Why?" "Well," she paused, glancing toward the window. "The storm is supposed to get pretty bad. I just don't want to be alone if it's really bad." Her tone was light, but Emal could hear the hint of worry behind it. "Don't worry. I've got your back. I'm sure it'll blow over," Emal said, trying to ease her tension. But as the hours went by, Emal began to feel the weight of the storm as it rolled in. The sky darkened, clouds thickened, and the wind picked up. It wasn't long before the first drops of rain began tapping on the windows. Around 2 p.m., the storm was already in full swing. Sarah had a large dog named Tom, a friendly but sometimes anxious animal. Tom was usually calm, but thunderstorms always made him nervous. Emal noticed that Tom was pacing around, ears flat against his head, and his eyes darting around the room. "Hey, buddy, what's wrong?" Emal asked as Tom trotted over to him. Emal reached out to scratch behind his ears, but the dog pulled away, looking up at the windows as if something outside had caught his attention. "Come on, Tom, relax," Emal said softly, trying to reassure the dog. But Tom's anxious behavior only seemed to grow more intense. He paced back and forth, his eyes fixed on the front door. Emal glanced toward the door. The wind outside howled, and the rain lashed against the house like a million tiny nails. It was unnerving, but Emal tried to ignore it. It was just a storm. Nothing more. "Just a storm," Emal muttered under his breath, though he couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of discomfort. The storm intensified as the afternoon wore on. Emal was sitting in the living room, reading through some notes for his investigation when the landline phone rang. Sarah had turned it off earlier in the day, so Emal was surprised when it rang again, the sound echoing through the house. The caller ID was blocked, and the number was unknown. Hesitant, Emal picked up the phone. "Hello." At first, there was nothing but a soft rustling sound, like wind moving through branches. Then, a voice crackled from the other end, low and distant. "Sarah, can you hear me?" Emal froze. The voice was faint, eerie, as if someone were speaking from far away, hiding beneath a tree in the rain. It didn't sound like anyone he knew. A chill ran down his spine. "Hello. Who is this?" Emal asked, his voice shaking slightly. There was no response. Only silence. He hung up, but his hands were clammy. It didn't sit right with him. Emal thought about texting Sarah to let her know, but before he could do that, the phone rang again. Same blocked number. Same eerie silence. "This is getting weird," Emal muttered. Later that evening, the storm raged outside, thunder booming in the distance, and lightning flashing across the sky. Emal had moved into Sarah's bedroom to watch a movie, trying to take his mind off the unsettling phone calls. Tom, who had been lying next to the door, suddenly sat up, his ears twitching. His eyes were fixed on the door, and he began to growl softly. "Tom, what's up with you?" Emil asked, glancing over at the dog. Tom didn't respond. His eyes were still locked on the door, his body tense with anticipation. Emil stood up, trying to shake off the feeling of dread creeping up his spine. He walked over to the door and peered through the peephole. It was hard to see through the foggy glass, but then something caught his eye. A figure, standing just outside. It was hard to make out details, but it looked like someone was standing motionless in the rain. Emil's heart started to race. "Who the hell is that?" he whispered. He took a step back, trying to calm himself. Maybe it was just someone passing by, seeking shelter from the storm. But Tom's growling intensified, his agitation growing with each passing second. Emil checked the peephole again. The figure was still there, standing perfectly still in the rain, like it was waiting for something. Emil's mind raced. Who was outside in the storm? And why hadn't they knocked on the door, or tried to get inside? He felt his pulse quicken. Tom was no longer growling, but the dog was now staring at the door with a new intensity, as if he knew something Emil didn't. A sudden, chilling realization hit Emil. Where did the figure go? He quickly looked through the peephole again, but the person had vanished. There was no one outside anymore. His heart skipped a beat. Had he imagined it? Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks on him, or the shadows from the trees, distorted by the wind. But something told him that wasn't the case. Emil sat back down on the bed, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. But as the minutes passed, the tension only grew. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed through the house. It was barely audible over the storm, but it was enough to make Emil's blood run cold. The knock came again, louder this time, like someone was gently tapping on the door. Emil froze. He looked over at Tom, who was now pacing back and forth, his eyes fixed on the bedroom door. "Who's there?" Emil called out, his voice tight with fear. There was no response, only the sound of the rain pounding against the windows. Another knock. Then, another. Emil's mind raced. Should he open the door? Should he call for help? The knock came again, this time, harder, more insistent. Emil's thoughts were spinning. Every instinct in his body screamed at him not to open the door. But the curiosity, the need to know who was out there, gnawed at him. Was it a prank? Was it someone he knew? "No, don't do it," he muttered under his breath. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a heavy silence. Emil's heart was pounding in his chest. He couldn't take it anymore. He had to look. But as he stood up, he felt a sudden surge of panic. Something was wrong. Emil hesitated at the door, his hand on the doorknob. He knew something wasn't right. He slowly turned the knob and cracked open the door just a few inches. What he saw made his stomach drop. A figure stood in the hallway, just out of view. They were tall and wore a dark hooded coat that covered most of their face. Their presence felt like a weight in the room. Tom growled softly, and Emil's blood ran cold. This was no ordinary visitor. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, like a shadow in the dim light. Emil's thoughts raced. "Who are you?" Emil asked, his voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, waiting. A low growl escaped Tom's throat. Then, without warning, the figure stepped forward, moving toward the door. Emil slammed it shut, locking it immediately. He backed away, his breath quickening. What was happening? Who was this person? Was it the same one who had been calling? Emil grabbed his phone and dialed 911, his hands shaking. "Help! Someone's in the house!" he shouted into the phone. He could hear the footsteps outside the door, heavy and deliberate. The figure was still out there, moving toward him. Emil bolted to the window and pulled the curtain aside, hoping to get a glimpse of the intruder. But there was nothing. The figure had disappeared again. When the police arrived, they found no trace of the intruder. The house was quiet, and the storm had finally begun to die down. The officers checked the perimeter and found no signs of forced entry. "It's likely a stalker," one officer said, his tone serious. "You did the right thing by calling us." Emal couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Whoever this person was, they were watching. And they weren't done. In the end, the case remained unsolved. The police couldn't track the number, and no further incidents occurred. Emal stayed at Sarah's house for the night, but the sense of unease lingered. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. If he had opened that door when Tom first started acting strange, who knew what might have happened? He could have let the intruder in, thinking it was nothing. But by trusting his instincts, he had avoided disaster. And he would never forget that lesson. Sometimes, in the face of danger, it's the smallest decisions that can make all the difference. It was a cold, wet night on December 5, 2023, in the small, remote village of Brussels, Belgium. A town quiet enough to feel forgotten by the rest of the world. It sat about 30 kilometers outside the city, where the countryside stretched as far as the eye could see. The streets were mostly dirt roads, unlit and empty, especially on nights like this one. The rain had been falling incessantly, the sound of it on the windows creating an eerie backdrop to the otherwise silent night. I was home with my wife, Emily. We had moved here to escape the bustle of city life, to find some peace away from everything. Tonight, though, the storm outside seemed to suffocate that peace. I was reading a book in the living room, the faint glow of a lamp barely cutting through the dark shadows of the room. Emily was in the kitchen, preparing a quiet dinner for us. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the harsh chill of the storm outside, but despite the comfort, something gnawed at me. A faint knock echoed from the front door. The knock was soft at first, almost like a whisper, but there was something about it that sent a shiver down my spine. It was late, too late for anyone to be calling. I glanced over at Emily, who had stopped in her tracks. She looked at me, her eyes wide with the same unease I felt. No one ever visited at this hour, especially not in a storm like this. I stood up, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread, and walked to the door. When I opened it, I was met with the sight of a man standing in the rain. He was drenched, his clothes clinging to his body like a second skin. His hair was wet and stuck to his face, obscuring his features. He held a large bag in one hand, his eyes wide with a mix of confusion and desperation. "Can I help you?" I asked, instinctively taking a step back, my heart thudding in my chest. He looked at me, his voice soft but urgent. "I think I'm lost," he said. "I was heading back to my village, but my bike broke down. Could you help me out? Just until the rain lets up." I hesitated. There was something unsettling about him, something that didn't sit right. Still, I couldn't leave him out there, not in that storm. I nodded, opening the door wider. "Come in. Get out of the rain," I said, stepping aside. The man stepped inside quickly, shivering as he brushed past me. His name, he said, was John. He was from London, on a business trip, though he didn't say much more than that. As soon as he was inside, I offered him a towel and a hot cup of tea. He sat on the couch, his bag still clutched tightly in his lap. Emily came into the living room, eyeing John with curiosity but saying nothing. I could tell she felt the same unease. She wasn't one for strangers, especially not ones who appeared out of nowhere on nights like this. "Where exactly are you from?" I asked, trying to make conversation to ease the tension in the air. He seemed to think for a moment before answering. "It's a small village, really. A couple of hours from here. I guess I took a wrong turn, got caught in the rain." I nodded, watching him carefully. His face was pale, almost too pale, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. There was something about him, something wrong. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "how did you end up out here, of all places?" John sighed, his shoulders slumping as he relaxed into the couch. "I was trying to get to the village, but my bike broke down. I thought I could wait out the storm, but it just kept getting worse. That's when I saw your house." His eyes flickered toward the window as a flash of lightning illuminated the night sky. I glanced outside, seeing nothing but the endless sheets of rain and darkness. It was impossible to make anything out in this weather. I should probably leave soon, he added, but his voice faltered, as if he wasn't entirely sure of that. I was about to speak when I noticed something strange. On the table next to him, his bag had been opened, and a book lay on the surface. It looked old, its cover worn, and what caught my eye the most was the symbol embossed on it, a strange design I had never seen before. "What's that?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John looked down at the book, his face tightening. "It's something my grandfather gave me. It's important to me." He reached over and picked it up, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. I leaned forward, curious despite the strange unease crawling up my spine. The pages were yellowed with age, and some were blank. Others were filled with writing, cryptic symbols, some in English, others in what looked like Urdu. The more I looked at it, the more unsettled I became. There was something about it that seemed alive. "Why do you carry this around?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. John hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice came, low and strained. "When I was younger, I opened it. Inside, there was a picture of a house that looked just like the one near your village." He looked at me, his expression grave. "And after that, it started appearing in my dreams." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What kind of dreams?" He leaned forward, his voice low. "The house would call to me, show me things. Things that didn't make sense, but they felt real." His eyes seemed to lose focus for a moment, as if he was reliving the dream. And then, there was something else. A figure. A dark figure, watching me. Before I could respond, a sound came from outside, a faint thud, like a stone hitting the ground. My heart skipped a beat, and I stood up, instinctively moving toward the door. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely steady. John's eyes widened, his hand clutching the book tightly. "Yeah," he whispered. "I heard it." We both stared at the door, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. The storm raged on outside, but in that moment, it felt like something else was there, something watching. I opened the door slowly, my pulse quickening. When I stepped outside, I saw nothing at first. The rain fell in sheets, the wind howled, and the night was suffocatingly dark. But then, in the distance, I saw a shape, an outline of something unnatural. My stomach churned. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice tight with fear. John nodded, his voice barely audible. "It's the house from my dreams. The one in the book." We both stood there, staring, as the shape became clearer. It was a house. An old, decrepit house standing at the edge of the village. Its silhouette loomed against the stormy backdrop, and as we watched, the door creaked open slowly, as if inviting us in. I turned to John, my heart racing. "We have to check it out," I said, barely knowing why I felt compelled to go. John's face turned pale, his hands trembling. "We shouldn't. It's dangerous." But something deep inside me, something that wasn't entirely my own, pushed me forward. I stepped into the rain, the cold water soaking my shoes, and John reluctantly followed. The house loomed larger as we approached, its door still creaking open, as if waiting for us. The air around it felt heavy, oppressive, like it didn't belong in this world. I reached the door first, pushing it open with a creak. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind us with a violent bang. Darkness engulfed us, and the only sound was the rain tapping furiously against the roof. I reached for the light switch, but it didn't work. The house felt like it was alive, and it was holding its breath, waiting. I turned to John, my voice shaky. "What is this place?" John was staring at something I couldn't see, his face pale with fear. "It's not just a house," he whispered. "It's a trap." Then we heard it. A soft creaking sound, coming from the far end of the room. It was slow at first, almost deliberate. My heart hammered in my chest as a figure slowly emerged from the shadows, its shape tall and hunched. At first, I couldn't make out any details, just a blur of darkness. But as it moved closer, I could see its face, or rather, the absence of one. It was a shadow, a silhouette without form, and its eyes were hollow, empty voids staring straight through us. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. The figure's presence froze me in place. The figure spoke in a low, rumbling voice that felt like it came from deep within the earth. "You should not have come here," it said. "But now that you have, you must make a choice. If you ever return, you will regret it. But if you leave and promise never to return, I will let you go." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a ghost, it was something far darker, far more malevolent. John's voice trembled. "We promise. We won't come back." As soon as the words left his mouth, the figure vanished into the darkness. The door creaked open again, as if allowing us to leave. We didn't hesitate. We ran out of that house as fast as our legs could carry us, fear and adrenaline propelling us forward. The storm still raged, but I didn't care. We needed to get away. When we reached the edge of the property, I turned to look back. The house was gone. Just gone. And then I looked at John. John was gone too. There was no sign of him anywhere. I called his name, panic rising in my chest. But the more I searched, the more I realized he was never there. I had been alone all along. To this day, I don't understand what happened that night. I've tried to forget it, to convince myself it was just a bad dream or some strange trick of the mind. But the memories, of the figure, the house, the promise, still haunt me. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the rain taps against my window, I wonder if I'll ever be able to escape it. But there's something I haven't told you. Something that only I know. The house wasn't just a place. It was a memory. And it's still waiting for me to return. Sarah never thought a weekend getaway could change her life. She was a fashion designer, always caught up in the hustle and bustle of creating and perfecting her work. She had been running on fumes, and her last big project had left her exhausted. The weight of deadlines and expectations pressed down on her like a heavy fog. It had been one of those rare moments when she decided she needed a break, a complete disconnect from everything. That's when John, her childhood friend, called. He knew her better than anyone else. They had been through everything together. So when Sarah admitted she was burning out, John suggested a weekend in the mountains. It seemed like the perfect idea, a small, secluded hotel tucked away in the heart of nowhere. Somewhere she could turn off her phone, forget about the endless meetings, and breathe in the crisp, clean air. What could go wrong? "Let's just go," John said. "Get away from it all." Sarah didn't argue. After all, John was right. She needed this. And so, they set off for a place neither of them had ever been, a small hotel nestled deep in a range of mountains, miles away from the nearest town. As they drove, the world around them seemed to change. The roads grew narrower, the trees thicker, and the air colder. It was as if the mountains were swallowing them whole. By the time they reached the hotel, dusk had settled in. The building was old, much older than Sarah had expected. Its wooden structure creaked and groaned in the wind, and a faint smell of decay lingered in the air. It looked like something out of an old horror movie, exactly the kind of place that Sarah, with her love for art and the macabre, would normally enjoy. But tonight, there was something unsettling about it. A chill ran down her spine as they walked up to the front door. The bell over the door jingled softly as they entered. The lobby was dark and smelled of dust and mothballs. The front desk was empty, but after a few moments, a man appeared. He was tall, thin, with a gray beard that seemed a bit too long for comfort. His eyes were dark, almost hollow, but there was something kind in them, too. Something that made Sarah feel both uneasy and strangely safe. "Welcome," he said in a gravelly voice. "We don't get many visitors this time of year." Sarah forced a smile and nodded, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that was creeping up on her. She had no idea why, but something about the place felt wrong. John, however, didn't seem to notice. He was already chatting with the man, asking about the history of the hotel. "We've had it for years," the man said, his eyes lighting up. "It's an old family hotel. Been passed down through generations. It's seen a lot of changes, of course. But there's something about it, something that keeps people coming back." Sarah wasn't convinced, but she didn't say anything. The man handed them a key, and they headed to their room on the second floor. The room was simple, but cozy. The bed had a thick quilt, the kind that smelled faintly of lavender, and the windows offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. Sarah sighed in relief. It was beautiful here. Peaceful. The kind of place that could make her forget about her busy life. But as they sat down to dinner in the small, dimly lit dining room, something felt off. The waitstaff moved silently, their faces blank. There was no laughter, no casual conversation. It was as if the place was frozen in time. Sarah looked at John, who was staring at the food on his plate, his brow furrowed. She felt a wave of unease wash over her. "I don't know why," she said softly, "but I feel strange here." John glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You're just tired. We've been working too hard. Let's try to relax." She tried, really. But as the evening wore on, the air in the hotel grew heavier. The distant sound of wind howling outside added to the growing sense of dread. It was almost as if the hotel itself was breathing, sighing, waiting for something. They retired to their room early, and for a while, things seemed fine. John fell asleep quickly, his steady breathing a comforting sound in the otherwise silent room. Sarah, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her mind raced, and she kept turning over what the hotel manager had said about the history of the place. Had something happened here? Was that what was making her feel so unsettled? And then she heard it. At first, Sarah thought it was the wind. But as she lay there in the dark, the sound grew louder. It was a soft, deliberate noise, almost like footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps, creeping closer and closer to the window. She lay perfectly still, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure how long she lay there, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination. But then, the steps stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing. Absolute silence. And then, just as she was starting to relax, she saw it. A shadow. A faint, dark shape near the window. It was still. Motionless. But it was there, right where the steps had stopped. Her blood ran cold, and she tried to wake John, but the words caught in her throat. Her hand trembled as she reached for the lamp, and when she flicked the switch, the shadow disappeared instantly. "Sarah!" John mumbled in his sleep, barely awake. "What's wrong?" I thought I saw something," she whispered, her voice trembling. John turned over, his eyes barely open. "It's probably just the wind. Go back to sleep." But Sarah couldn't sleep. Not now. Not after what she'd seen. The next morning, Sarah couldn't shake the image of the shadow. It haunted her, crawling into her thoughts with each passing hour. She knew she had to get some answers. She found the hotel manager near the lobby, busy cleaning the counter. Sarah approached him cautiously, trying to ignore the strange feeling creeping up her spine. "I was wondering," she began, "you mentioned last night that this place had a history. Could you tell me more about it?" The manager paused, looking at her with a strange, knowing gaze. He didn't seem surprised by the question, almost as if he'd been expecting it. "Well," he said slowly, "the hotel was once a family home. A family who, well, they met with a tragic end. It was years ago now, but the stories still linger. They say the house was cursed, haunted by something that never left. Their spirits still roam these halls." Sarah felt her heart race. She wasn't sure if she believed in ghosts, but the way the manager spoke made her question everything. "What happened to them?" she asked, barely able to whisper the words. "The family died in an accident," he said, his voice low. "A car crash. But no one ever really knew the truth." Some say it was a tragic mistake, others say it was something darker. Some believe their spirits never left. That's why things happen here. The hotel has a certain presence. Sarah couldn't breathe. She had always loved stories like this, the dark, twisted ones, but now that she was in the middle of it, it was different. Her pulse thudded in her ears as the manager turned away, leaving her to process what he had just told her. That night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Her curiosity was eating away at her, and she felt as though she needed to uncover the truth. John had fallen asleep early again, and Sarah knew this was her chance. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. The hotel seemed so quiet, almost too quiet. The air felt thick, like something was waiting in the shadows. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she had to find out. Slowly, she got out of bed and tiptoed toward the window. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting eerie shadows across the room. She opened the window slightly, peering out into the night. And that's when she saw it again. The same shadow, just outside. It moved, slowly, deliberately. But this time, it wasn't just standing there. It was walking, its movements jerky and unnatural. A part of Sarah wanted to scream, but another part told her to stay silent, to observe. The shadow came closer, closer until it was right outside her window. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. It was then that she saw it, a figure, hazy and indistinct, hovering in the moonlight. Its features were vague, like it was made of smoke or mist. But one thing was certain, it wasn't human. Sarah couldn't explain why she felt compelled to approach the figure. Her heart was hammering in her chest, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. The figure was glowing now, a soft, ethereal light surrounding it like a halo. She stumbled back from the window, her mind racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. She had to be dreaming. But the light, bright, pulsating, almost beckoning, continued to glow in the darkness outside. Then, the light flickered and dimmed, and a heavy sound filled the air. Something had fallen, but what? Where? She didn't know, but she had to leave. She had to get out of there. The door was shut, and she was trembling. The air felt thick with something she couldn't name. The presence was suffocating. With shaking hands, she bolted the door and collapsed onto the bed. The following morning, Sarah and John decided it was time to leave. The air was still, the sky clouded, and the mountains seemed to close in on them. They packed quickly, their unease growing with every passing minute. But before they left, Sarah had one final question. She had to know more about the history of the place. The manager was waiting by the front door, and she pulled him aside. "I need to know," she asked, "what really happened to that family?" The manager looked at her with a sad, knowing expression. "Some stories are better left untold," he murmured. "Sometimes, the past is better left where it belongs." Sarah's heart was racing as she stared at the manager, the unease of the night before still fresh in her mind. His words hung in the air, heavy and mysterious, like a fog she couldn't escape. She opened her mouth to ask more, but before she could speak, the manager looked away, his face closing up. "Sometimes," he continued in a low voice, "people don't leave. Sometimes, they stay. But not in the way you might think." He seemed to hesitate, as if weighing whether or not to say more. Sarah felt a strange pull, an urgency to understand, something that had been gnawing at her ever since she had arrived at the hotel. "There were rumors," the manager finally whispered, his eyes darting around as though checking for eavesdroppers. "The family didn't just die in an accident. No one really knows for sure, but they were involved in something. Something dark. Something the hotel was built on." He paused again, eyes narrowing as if realizing he was treading dangerous ground. "Do you believe in curses?" he asked suddenly, his voice hushed. Before Sarah could answer, the door to the lobby opened, and a gust of cold wind rushed in. The manager froze, his eyes narrowing into the distance as though sensing something. Sarah turned, her pulse quickening. There was no one there. The manager stood up straight, as if shaken from a trance. "Get out of here," he said abruptly. "Take your friend, leave while you still can." John appeared at the door then, his face cheerful, unaware of the tension in the air. "Everything all right?" he asked, glancing between the manager and Sarah. But Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. The fear that had been lingering in her chest all night had now settled into a knot of dread. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something horribly wrong in this place. As they packed their bags in haste, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel was watching them, the walls seeming to lean in closer, the air thick with unspoken threats. The lobby was quieter than it had been before, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch longer, as though the building itself was growing larger, folding in on itself. The light from outside had dimmed, and the wind howled through the narrow windows. Sarah felt like they were being swallowed by the very mountain that had once seemed so peaceful. She didn't care about the hotel's beauty anymore. She only wanted to leave. But even as she gathered the last of her things, she felt an invisible force, an unseen hand, pushing them to stay, to face what had been waiting for them. She glanced at John, his face a mixture of confusion and curiosity. She couldn't explain it, not yet. But she could feel it in her bones. Whatever had happened here, whatever had been unleashed, wasn't finished. The hotel wasn't done with them. "Are you sure you want to leave?" John asked quietly, his voice tense. Sarah nodded, but the words stuck in her throat. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him everything, but how could she explain something so unreal? How could she explain the shadow, the light, the figure outside the window? How could she describe the feeling that something was still lurking, waiting for them? The road back was silent. The air outside the hotel felt heavy, as though the mountain had placed a weight on their shoulders. Every turn in the narrow road felt like it was leading them deeper into a place they shouldn't be. The trees loomed darkly, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to grab them. As they descended down the winding mountain road, Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She thought she had left the fear behind. She thought she had escaped. But the sense of unease, the feeling that something was still following them, gnawed at her. The shadow, the flickering light, the strange noise, it was all too much. She couldn't shake it. It was then that they saw it, a figure in the distance, just at the edge of the road. It was standing in the middle of the path, tall and gaunt, its features hidden by a thick cloak. The figure didn't move, not even as the headlights of the car illuminated it. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to slow, the car's engine humming dully in the background. John slowed the car, frowning. "Who the hell is that?" Before Sarah could answer, the figure disappeared into the woods, vanishing without a trace. "That was strange," John muttered, shaking his head. "Maybe someone was stranded." Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. She had seen what she needed to see. She knew the figure wasn't human. She knew it was connected to the hotel. The very same presence that had stalked them the night before was now following them, refusing to let them go. After what felt like hours, they reached the nearest town, the sound of the engine seeming too loud in the silence that had fallen over them. Sarah couldn't stop shaking. She didn't speak for a long time, but when she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "John," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to go back." John looked at her, his brow furrowed. "What?" "No, Sarah, we're getting out of here." "No," she said, more firmly this time. "The hotel. The family. It's all connected. We can't leave it like this. I have to know what happened." John stared at her, unsure. He had always been the skeptic, the one who refused to believe in anything that couldn't be explained. But Sarah had seen something, felt something, that he couldn't deny. She had been the one to hear the footsteps, to see the shadow. And now, it seemed, she couldn't escape it. "I don't think you understand," Sarah said quietly. "We're not leaving. We're not safe. Not until we know what happened to that family." John hesitated, his face pale. "Sarah, you're scaring me." But Sarah wasn't listening. She knew what she had to do. It wasn't just about facing the hotel anymore. It was about understanding the truth. The truth about the family, the curse, and whatever was still lingering in that place. That night, as they returned to the hotel, the air felt different. The mountain loomed high above them, its silhouette dark and menacing. They stood outside the hotel, staring up at the decaying building, a sense of finality settling in the pit of Sarah's stomach. She stepped forward, leading the way, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. The hotel was quiet, too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. The shadows in the corners seemed darker now, more menacing, as though the walls themselves were alive. In the lobby, the manager was waiting for them. His face was blank, his eyes tired, as though he had been expecting them. He didn't say a word, but his presence spoke volumes. Sarah could feel his gaze on her, but she didn't flinch. "I need to know everything," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. "What happened to the family? Why is this place cursed?" The manager sighed deeply, a long, tired sound. He gestured for them to follow him. They descended into the basement of the hotel. It was colder here, the air thick with mildew and rot. As they reached the back of the basement, the manager stopped. "There is a door here," he said, his voice low. "It leads to what remains of the family's estate. It is where the curse began." He pushed open a hidden door, and they entered the darkened room beyond. There, Sarah saw it, a dusty old trunk, covered in cobwebs. The walls were adorned with strange symbols Sarah didn't recognize but felt a deep, instinctual fear toward. The manager turned to her. "This is where it all began. The family wasn't just cursed by accident. They were part of something much darker." Sarah stepped forward, reaching out toward the trunk. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to open it. As her fingers brushed the lid, she could feel the darkness inside. It was then that she understood. The family hadn't just died. They had been sacrificed. And now, the spirits of the dead still lingered, unable to escape. The curse had bound them to this place, and it wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The light flickered, and suddenly, the air was filled with whispers. Whispers from the past. Whispers of death, of regret, of things best left forgotten. And Sarah knew, as the shadows closed in around them, that they had never truly left. They were still trapped, bound to the hotel, to the mountains, to whatever had been unleashed that night. Sometimes, in life, we ignore the signs, those moments of unease that tell us something isn't right. And when we ignore them, we face consequences we're not prepared for. The lesson here is simple. Trust your instincts. Not everything can be explained, and not every place is meant for you to enter. When something feels off, walk away, no matter how inviting it seems.